Hello there. Welcome to part 26 of my build log of the Trumpeter 1 to 200 scale model of the Titanic. Today may well be a little bit of a letdown for some people. There's not a huge amount of modelling in this one. Today I'm going to be covering how I have worked out the B-deck lighting. The reason I say this might be a bit of a letdown is because the last few videos have sort of quite nicely consecutively followed each other. It's been quite clear what comes next. In this particular video, pretty much everything I've done, I've had to work out as I've gone along. I really haven't had too much of a plan in my head until I've got to this point, and I've looked at what I've got and I've been able to work something out. So there's a lot of clips of me talking over what I've done rather than clips of me actually doing it. But I hope it will still be of some use to you. So anyway, I've blabbled on for far too long, so without any further ado, we'll crack on. Just working on some deck lighting here. As you can see, I've got a surface mount LED underneath the glass. It's tricky to film this and to actually make it doable for myself, so apologies if the camera angle isn't brilliant. So this is a surface mount LED down here. Before I can do anything regarding deck lighting, I need to get some wires attached to it. So that's what I'm doing at the moment. So what I've done first of all is I've flushed the pads of the LED with some solder. And now what I'm going to do is attempt to attach this wire to the pads. So there's the positive connection. Just as a point, you can buy these LEDs with wires already attached. And I think, based on my experience, I probably would recommend it, even if you're a very good solderer, which, by the way, I am not. But there's so many LEDs to put on the model that you'll just save yourself so much time, and they're not that much more expensive. And secondly, we'll do the negative connection as well. So there we are. Surface mount LED wired now. As I say, this video has taken a long time to get up, but when you see the detail and how fiddly these things are to actually do, and the fact that I need about 30 of these LEDs, I'm sure you can understand why it takes so long. So I'm just testing some of my LEDs for the deck lighting. I got these off eBay. I'll pop them in the description down below. And what I've been doing is I've just been doing a really rough bit of testing. Just got my soldering iron out. Testing on the type of power that I'm actually using on the boat. So what I've done for these, I'm aware that when you make something like this, it's quite easy for things to become very complicated. You've got my strip light LEDs run off 12 volts. And ideally I don't want my deck lighting LEDs to go off any less than that, because I don't want to have to start putting power voltage regulators and stuff in, which then change your 12 down to 5 and all that kind of stuff. It just adds to the complexity so much more, and I don't really think the model could do with any more complexity. So I've been doing a bit of testing. Protection resistor, this is all very rough and ready at the minute, by the way. Protection resistor, and then I've got 4 LEDs wired in series. So 12 divided by 4, that gives us 3 volts across each LED, plus a little bit less. And when I complete the circuit, and when I actually complete the circuit without being an idiot, there we go, 4 LEDs turning on. Originally I started with 3 LEDs, and it worked just fine, but they were a little bit too bright. and I don't want these things to be too bright because 1912 lighting, once again, it shouldn't be really bright, it should just be fairly soft lighting, and I think this does quite a good job. I might need to reduce it further because I am very aware that it's quite light outside at the moment, so this might even now be a bit bright, but I can always do that nearer the time if I need to. So for now, this has been quite a successful test. I'm quite happy with this, and I'm also quite happy with the actual colour of these bulbs as well. So in this clip I am adding my deck lighting LEDs into the aft stairwell. First thing I'm doing is to cut off the plastic indentations which show the deck lights. I then drill out those holes and mount the LEDs that I've been using behind them. I've used a circuit of 4 LEDs for this area because there are 4 deck lights that need to be added here, so that ended up being quite convenient. So here we are with these 4 LEDs now installed in the stairwell. Damn fiddly work this. But the advantage of this is that what I've done is I've drilled holes in the side of the plastic where the deck lighting should be. And I was originally going to backfill behind these LEDs with putty so that the light only shone out of the deck light holes. But I realised actually in this specific location it's a bit advantageous not to do that because these LEDs also shine back into the stairwell, which means I don't need to do any other lighting in this specific area. So it's actually quite a nice coincidence that everything's sort of lined up perfectly. So I thought I'd show you some of the aft deck lighting. Before anyone says anything, I know, those LEDs in reality were above the doors, but in this kit there is no space available for that to happen because most of the rest of the height on this bulkhead comes on the piece of plastic which makes up B-deck, and I can't run wires through here and through the B-deck thing because otherwise I wouldn't be able to remove the superstructure. So I've had to make a small concession to accuracy and put the deck light there instead, but it looks all right anyway, I think. So I've got 4 deck lights in place and I'm going to add more as we go. You can see 4 deck lights here, and I need to add 2 more. 1 here and 1 here. And I need to add some more under the aft bridge as well, but aft bridge is not in place yet, so I'm not going to do that. The other stuff that I've done is I have made up the circuitry for this area of the ship. Ow, my leg. So what I've done is I've got the same style connector that I've used on the hull wiring, just here, and that's here. This allows me to detach the lighting circuit if I ever need to remove the aft deck sections. And that's got some strain relief in place with cable ties here and here. We then go up to a protection resistor and then a series circuit of 4 LEDs and back round. For the remaining LEDs on this section, I can take branches off here again and make another series circuit which will be in parallel with this circuit. So I end up with multiple series circuits in parallel, if you see what I mean. I'm using 4 LEDs in a string because that seems to be about the optimum number in terms of brightness, and brightness is really the thing I'm most concerned about. Power consumption I'm less concerned about, because if I'm honest, I think 9 times out of 10 I'll use the lighting when the model's in its case. You know, most of the time I'll be using the model on the lake during the day, so lighting will be fairly pointless anyway. So most of the time lighting will probably be used in its case where power really isn't a consideration. Not always, but most of the time. So I'm really happy with how this turned out. The LEDs look pretty good, I think. There's a slight amount of light bleed, as you can see through, but it's rather obscured because the light is bright enough. It looks like the light is just shining off the surface rather than actually soaking through the plastic. So I think I'd rather get away with it, but by all means be the judge of that yourselves. The real proof of the pudding with this will be when I try it in the dark. It's very, very difficult to work out how much light bleed you have when it's as light as this. So I'll have to hold judgment on that perhaps until the sun goes down, and then I'll be able to have another look. But for now, I'm really happy with that. And I'm very happy with how I've managed to get a system by which I can actually detach this lighting quite easily from the rest of the ship. And here is the front LEDs. Same again, 2 deck lighting LEDs. You can't quite see that one, but 2 deck lighting LEDs. I'm not doing anything further forward because there would have been lights and stuff around here. But when the ship was sailing, which is when my model's set, you wouldn't have any lights which face towards the bridge turned on, because that would essentially reduce the bridge's visibility forward down to pretty much 0. Bit like you know, if you're driving on the motorway and you've got a car coming at you with its headlights, you literally can't see anything. So you wouldn't have any lights forward of the bridge facing backwards on. So these are the only deck lights I've got going forward. I've added 2 other lights sort of angled along like this to illuminate these windows here. And that then also gives me my 4 LED chain, same as before, resistor tucked away there, and these wires then go through strain relief to a connector. And once again, that allows me to disconnect the lights for the forward section quite easily and reconnect them at will. Another thing that I've done is I've simplified access to the smoke generator. Previously, because of the plumbing, it was very difficult. You'd have to sort of pull the plumbing off to gain access to the brass tube, which is how you can take measurements of how much fluid is in the smoke generator and also how you can replenish it. What I've now done is I've drilled a hole in the top of this T-piece which leads down into the generator, which means I can fill up and I can also measure. And when not in use, I've created a bung which sits in the top and prevents any smoke escaping from that area and allows the smoke to go out through the 3 funnels instead. So you might be wondering, I've got a lot of different feeds from different lighting circuits. This is up to the Superstructure, but I haven't shown you that yet. But you might be wondering where I'm getting them all from. And the answer is here. So I'm not really doing a very good job of showing it. But as was always the way, I'm using these Wi-Fi switches to actually switch my lighting on and off via my radio transmitter. but I'm needing to run these all in parallel circuits. So what I've got is I've got these 5-way WIGO plugs. One of them essentially becomes a negative buzz bar, and the other, essentially, which is underneath, becomes a positive buzz bar. And that way I can have lots of different parallel circuits all running from that single Wi-Fi switch. So I've got one parallel circuit for the aft lighting, I've got one parallel circuit for the forward lighting, another parallel circuit for the hull lighting, and a final one for the superstructure. So another thing that I've done is I have updated my electronics boards. I wasn't very happy with the wooden ones. They were a bit clunky. They weren't all that well made, and they also raised the electronics up a lot higher than they needed to be. I think the wooden ones meant that the electronics was about 10 mil higher than it should have been. And of course, that raised all of this mass 10 mil higher. And when you're making a model boat, you want the mass as low down in the ship as possible. So anything you can do to lower your mass is advantageous. So what I've done now is I've made some new electronics boards from quite thin 3mm polystyrene. Same polystyrene, in fact, that I used to make the partition walls on B deck. They're secured much better than the old ones, and I'll show you how I've done that in just a sec. I haven't updated any of the circuitry. The circuitry remains as it was, but what I have done in places is I've invested in some slightly better components. So for example here, I have admittedly quite a large, but also quite useful fuse holder. What it does is it allows me to arrange my wiring much better. Before the wiring was here, there and everywhere. Now it's nice and neat, it's restrained, it's not touching anything, and you'll be surprised how important that is. If you've got wiring running everywhere, vibration and stuff like that can cause your wiring insulation to fail over time. And that's when you end up with short circuits and potentially blown fuses, or potentially worse. So it's worth putting some time into that. So I'm very happy with it. So here is my revised electronics stand. You can see I've got 4 M3 standoffs. And here is the underside of my new motherboard. 4 mounting holes here. So this flips over battery number 1 and can get bolted in place. So the first little bit of lighting that I need to do is I need to have a think about light bleed. Now light bleed can happen for a couple of reasons. It can happen if the lights are too strong and they can actually shine through the plastic itself, which obviously is not very useful. The other thing that you can get it is when you have slight misalignments or things haven't been quite glued together properly. And on this particular kit, because the plastic's quite thick, the latter is what I'm seeing a lot more of. And there's a couple of instances of light bleed. We've got stuff here on the second class promenade just aft of Cafe Parisien. We've got some. Same on the other side of the ship. You can just see a little sliver coming up there. We've got some on the well deck. It's not very obvious, but trust me, it is there. And we've got a little bit, you can see just through there on the poop deck, we've got a bit. And we've also got a bit here, which I don't really care about because this area is going to be lit anyway, so I don't give a toss. Same on these bits, don't really care about that. But I've got a fairly pronounced bit on the well deck at the front. So there's a fair few areas that have got light bleed issues that need to be rectified. I'm not saying I'm going to fix them all in this episode, I'm certainly not, but I am going to make a start on this sort of thing. So I've come up with a few ways to remove the light bleed issue. On the forward and aft well decks and poop deck and the forecastle deck, I've added sort of rubber skirts underneath where the decks actually sit. And these are made out of pretty thin vulcanized rubber. This allows them to be soft enough that when the deck slides over the top, they're able to deform to press up against the deck. But they're rigid enough that they remain in place, and they just provide a wall that stops the light going up through these gaps. So the gaps are still there, the gaps haven't been removed, and the reason for that is because these tend to be caused by the hull actually warping, and that's a really tricky thing to fix. So the gaps still exist, it's just that they now have no light shining through. That's the rationale here. The final thing is, on the superstructure I had a couple of issues, and so I've added things like some modelling putty on the sides where the hull buildings meet the actual sides of the ship, and at the back at deck joins I've filled any gaps with putty as well, and that has eliminated the light bleed issues along there. So I thought I would show the first idea I'm trying out to try to disguise the fact that the lion's share of B-deck doesn't have interiors in it, unlike obviously the back section where it's a bit more visible. So what I've done, first off, there is actually some glazing in these windows now. I've put very thin, 1/10 of a mil thick acrylic sheet, this stuff, and I've cut it fine and I've glued it into the windows. And to be honest, it is practically impossible to see, except when it's sunny. And that's when you get light sort of shining off it. And that's when I think it's just another one of those little things that just adds a little bit to the model's realism. You know, just every so often when the sun's shining on it, you'll get a flash from the window and you think, ah, just a little bit more realistic. And what I've done is about 15 mil behind that, I've added a strip of 1/2 mil thick polystyrene, which is this stuff here. And I bought it in a big sheet, and I've just cut it out into strips like this. And I've just rubbed it with a relatively mild sandpaper to give it this sort of frosted effect. I don't know if you can quite get it. There we are, it's just focused on the camera now. You can just get this sort of frosted effect. And what this does, or at least what I'm hoping this will do, it's worked when I've put it on a bench, and I'm now just seeing if it'll actually work installed into the ship. But what I'm hoping it will do is it will give you a bit of depth behind the window. So you'll be able to see that there is something behind the glazing, but it will disguise the fact that there's nothing else in the rooms. So it prevents you being able to see through one window and out to the other side of B-deck. Stops you being able to see things like the smoke extracts coming up from the chimney, from the funnels and that kind of stuff. But it still gives you a little bit of depth into the room. The other thing I'm hoping it will do is just take a bit of the edge off the boldness of the lighting, because I don't want this to be really powerful lighting. I want this to be fairly weak and diffuse lighting. Again, remember, this is 1912. We've not got LEDs. We've not even got particularly refined filament bulbs at this point. So the lighting on the ship will be less than what we would expect it to be, and significantly less than what you see in James Cameron's film. So I will now plug in some LEDs and see how this looks. So, a few things on B-deck lighting. On this section I'm going to use a magnetic cable. So as you can see, there is the lighting connection, and here is the connection in from the hull and the main power supply. The idea being that I can lift the superstructure off without having to worry about disconnecting these things, and it should then also clip in automatically. For those of you wondering, this is actually a connector for a phone charger. So the wire is appropriately sized, and it actually works pretty well. So the wire for all superstructure lighting comes in here, and then we have the upper portion with two 5-way Vigo plugs which connect into the ceiling lights for B-deck. So as you can see at the front, I've got double lighting, and then through the rest of the section, single. I've added an extra sprue here because I found that this wall blocks a lot of light. So that's why I've sort of doubled up along here, and then down into the back. You'll notice that I've cut out some sections here, and you'll notice that they tally with the 3 walls that these lights have to get over. So here we are. This is the B-deck lighting. Still need to do some ceiling lights for the deck spaces, but as you can see, I know I've not pushed this down properly, but even with the roof down, we get light bleed galore from the top. So that will need to be sorted. The rooms though look pretty good on the whole, particularly a la carte looks very nice. And then further along, you can see the effect that the frosted acrylic has had, where it just shows you, it shows that there is light coming through, but doesn't really give any definition of what the rooms hold beyond. So I'm quite happy with that. And again, you know, it quite clearly picks out things like private promenades. You can see the deck lighting up there as well. So far, pretty happy, but the next big thing that we will have to deal with is light bleed, and there's copious amounts of it. So as you can see, here is B-deck illuminated. I've not actually pushed the superstructure down properly at the moment. I'm just sort of doing a bit of testing, but I just wanted to demonstrate the value of the magnetic connector. So if I lift the superstructure off, it's very, very, very simple. And particularly when I'm dealing with something as fragile as the superstructure will end up being, by the time I've got things like lifeboats and rigging and all that stuff on it, I don't want to have to be worrying about things like wiring. So having something like that makes it so much easier. Hey up, so I've just finished the top lighting in the Cafe Parisien. In the clip before, it was quite dingy and dark. You can see now that it's actually it's got a nice warm glow to it. But there are some issues. So, as you can see, we've got some light bleed down the side. I'm hoping I might get away with that because, for one, Scale Decks needs to go on top of here. But also, it's such a difficult area to see. You know, to actually see that area, you would have to look right the way down the corridor, right the way down a deck promenade, which is tricky. So I'm going to have to make a judgment call on whether it's worth attacking that later. But I have light bleed in other places. As you can see, we get it here. But notably, when I push the hull against the superstructure, it's solved immediately. So what that is caused by is the slight warping in the hull, which a lot of people have reported. So to solve this, I think all I really need to do is put some more ribs in the hull, which just pulls the two sides together and makes them the correct distance apart, which should prevent that light bleed. As you can see, we've got light bleed from above the decks. From the ceiling down. So when I press down, it's reasonably well rectified, but at the minute there are still issues with that. So I am going to have to do something to solve it. I'm not entirely sure what, but I'm thinking some sort of drop down from inside the ceiling of a deck itself. I haven't yet put the stairwell in yet, so we don't know how good or bad the light bleed situation is there, but something needs to be done about it. And also, as you can see, it's very easy to see into the ship through these windows here. So I'm going to have to put some frosted glass behind those, like I've done with the cabins in the ship. But overall, I am really happy with this because, for one, the light isn't too bright, and I was a bit worried it would be, but the light isn't too bright, so it doesn't look over the top for 1912, but it does look light enough that you can actually see into things. The second thing I was worried about is the light isn't so bright that you can't see the detail. You know, I want the Cafe Parisien to be lit, but I don't want it to look like the sun's in there so I can't see anything, you know. And that is very much the same on the other side. You know, you can still very happily see into the Cafe Parisien. You're not being blinded by the light. It's just illuminating it nicely. So that's very good as well. So that's a good start, I think. So I'm now going to move on to A deck, and the idea is that I have my Wago plugs underneath this deck, so I'm just going to pull up 2 wires up into this deck, and I'll have another parallel circuit on A deck with the lighting for that. But that'll be the next video, probably a long way off because it's all time-consuming work, this, as I'm sure you can appreciate. But yeah, I am very happy with this. So I've put some reinforcing ribs in, and as you can see there is now no light bleed between my hull and my superstructure, and that is the same on both sides. So that's it for this episode. If you have enjoyed it, please give me a like or think about subscribing. If you've got any questions or comments, whack them down below and I'll do my best to get back to you as soon as possible. The next episode will be me finishing off B deck, hopefully. There's a few little model-y details I need to add, like the handrails along the sides of the walls, that sort of thing. I need to add a little bit of extra deck lighting in the rear. I still need to solve the light bleed issues at the back of the second class smoking room as well. And I'd like to add some ceiling ribs to the exposed sections of deck there. So, a little bit more to do and then I'll get on to A deck. So, thanks very much for watching and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.